Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, home of Kirk Muller, Walter Frank High, and me, it is my honor to introduce to America my friends, the Tragically Hip.
The Tragically Hip, the behemoths of Canadian music lore, for their music birthplace of Kingston, Ontario, across the prairies, tributaries, mountains, desolate corners of that, or even to Buffalo, New York, and the northern borders of US and Canada, where all of us benefited from that once-in-a-lifetime live performances, which were never duplicated, brilliantly original, and always led by one of the most oddly captivating and unique frontmen in the history of rock, Gordon Downie. 11 million people, nearly 1/3 of the population of Canada, watched this day 7 years ago as the Tragically Hip played a final show at the Rogers Centre in Toronto, Ontario. Not because they were breaking up or too old to play, but because their frontman of nearly 3 decades had terminal brain cancer, which would eventually take his life a year later. It's not common for a band to get to say goodbye to an entire country and fans the way this was done. And with the closing song Ahead by a Century, a fitting timetable, memory of a song, arguably one of their biggest hits, it is as if you couldn't hear nearly half of Canada singing along at that time. However, I liken that moment to another song, Blow It High Dough, with the lyrical lines as follows. I saw a movie once in my hometown. Everybody was in it for miles around. The band members have always been Gord Downie, lead vocals, acoustic guitar, Rob Baker, lead guitar, Paul Langlois, rhythm guitar, backing vocals, Gord Sinclair, bass, backing vocals, and Johnny Fay, drums and percussion. The band has won too many awards to list, but I'm going to say them anyway. The SOCAN Award in 1997 for National Achievement. They're on the Canada's Walk of Fame, Canadian Music Hall of Fame, Royal Conservative of Music, Governor General's Performing Arts Award, the Junos, in 1990, the Most Promising Group of the Year, in 91, Entertainers of the Year, in 93, Entertainers of the Year, in 95, Entertainers of the Year, in 95, they were the Group of the Year, 97, Group of the Year, Album of the Year, North Rockstar Album of the Year, All Trouble at the Henhouse. In 1999 was the Best Rock Album for Phantom Power, Best Album Design, Best Single, Best Rock Album in 2001, Music at Work, 2006, Artwork and Design for Hippopotamus, which was a music DVD, which featured them live, and went with Your Favorites, which is also now a Diamond album. Rock Album of the Year for Man Machine Poem in 2017, and Group of the Year. And in 2021, the Juno Humanitarian Award. Also, they are appointed to the Order of Canada. Not only that, they have their own way, the Tragically Hip Way in Canada. And they are one of only 4 bands to have a stamp in Canada. Rush, and the Guess Who, and Beau Damage, who I don't know. They have their own commemorative hockey sweaters in the Kingston Frontenac, the Mississauga Steelheads in a special theme night that was designed also by for them. And the city of Kingston unveiled the commemorative stone in Market Square. On May 2nd, 2018, All of Us, which was performed the Alberta Ballet, songs by the Tragically Hip. At the Figure Skating Expedition Gala concluding in the 2018 Winter Olympics, Canadian ice dancers performed a tribute routine set to Long-Time Running. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're from, Music Multiverse listeners. A special welcome to our Canadian friends who are probably joining us today. Welcome to the Catalog Review Show, our first one, and a very special one, the Tragically Hip. In honor of their final show that was played today, we celebrate the catalog of one of the largest and greatest bands of all time in Canadian legend. Welcome to our first ever catalog review show. Tonight, joining me, Sue Kuligowski and Deb Hicks.
Hello.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, ladies.
Hello. Hello.
So, just to give the fans, the people watching, what's going to happen, there are 14 records in question tonight, starting with the Tragically Hip's EP in 1987, going all the way to Man Machine Poem in 2016. Saskadelphia, which was released after that, is more of an add-on to Road Apples, so we're going to leave that off the list. So there are 14 albums tonight that are going to be ranked by our panelists. We're going to do 4 at a time, but before each panelist goes into their 4, since this is kind of a special edition, we'll let the panelists kind of talk about their experience or connection with the Tragically Hip. And we'll start with Deb, I guess, since you're sweating it out there in Carolina.
No, it's fine. I know that you wanted us to speak about maybe when the first time we heard the Hip or the first time they came into our music psyche. I really can't tell you. I can tell you it's very hard for me to think of a time when they weren't in my adulthood. I think you said, Mark, they formed the band in 87, but their first album was in 89. I was, at that point, I was starting my family and I was spending a little bit more time listening to music because I had a baby at home and, you can't concentrate on TV and that. But Buffalo has always been a big supporter of the Hip, so it has been on the radio more frequent than it would be in other parts of the country. So I think I just took it for granted that the Tragically Hip were always around and always accessible and just, something that I equate with hometown.
I understand that for sure.
Am I supposed to talk about the timeline of what really influenced me right now? Is that what you would like me to do?
That'd be fine. But however you want to flow with it.
Well, it was not until probably 2008. My boss's brother, who was a coworker of mine, unexpectedly passed away of a stroke at the early age of 40. And they are Native Canadians, but they moved down to the States to become businessmen. And his brother was running one of his businesses when he passed away. He was living in Erie, Pennsylvania at the time, and we all went down for his wake. And as we were standing in this, as you can imagine, for somebody that's 40 years old and is part of the community running a business, there were hundreds of people in line. And as you're standing in line, you could hear the video that was playing that was a tribute to his life, running through all the pictures of them as children, as teenagers, as adults, things that were happening in the business, them with their kids, and the whole entire montage was it was set up to all the Tragically Hip songs that Aaron loved. So I had probably 3 hours of standing in line and listening to song after song after song. And they weren't just on a loop either. They were, so that was my first introduction to maybe the extended catalog that I didn't know beforehand. And then it made me more interested in them, obviously, started listening to them more. And then in 2013, I believe, my friend Mark Kuligowski had a Meals to Music event at his home where he used Road Apples as the album to pair his wine and 7-course meal or whatever it was. That obviously was right up my alley because I like to eat. So it intrigued me to listen to that album a little bit more. And then unfortunately, I never got to see the Hip in person. It was never something that I was able to do, or they weren't around, they weren't touring in our area when it was convenient for me. But since the end of the Hip, we have a really great tribute band. I'm not a tribute band person, but locally we have the Strictly Hip, and over the last 4 years, I've seen them many times and probably have heard a lot of songs that I didn't even hear originally, that then has spurred me to listen to their original recordings of them. So that's my timeline with them.
Cool. Cool. So your 14, 13, 12, and 11 albums.
Okay. Man, Machine, Poem 14, Music at Work is 13, the self-titled Tragically Hip, and then Fully Completely.
Okay. Any particular reason? Or
just that I don't know them very much, or they didn't, the whole entire album didn't catch me, so I really, like I said, when you get down to where I rank them at the bottom as far as their catalog, stay tuned because I think there's a lot that I have left to learn and experience. How's that?
It's all where you come in. It's when your emotional connection was made, if it was, right, in some cases.
Yep.
So, all right, well, that's a good start. Those are ridiculously different albums and in their capacity and how they were delivered in the years. So that's interesting. Sue, I'll let you kick us off here with some of your timeline, etc.
So for me, I'm gonna say that obviously probably the person who introduced me to the Hip would be you. And I cannot remember if we were listening to the EP ahead of time, but my first memory of me like clicking with the band, I think we were in Toronto for my birthday. And I don't know, they played right on my birthday in 91.
Yes.
Is that the show we saw with the Skydiggers?
Yes, that would be the show.
Okay. Yeah, so that was I mean, I don't think it gets any better than that. I really didn't know a whole lot about them, probably other than what you shared with me. So, and we were probably doing a long weekend in Toronto. I remember we tried to get tickets and we couldn't, and you wound up getting some on site for well over the ticket price, but I think we were like front row, and so Ontario Place, it was around, so very small, very intimate. Back in the early 90s, everyone was so super friendly. It was like one of my first Canadian concerts too. So you're like getting this whole vibe of people, and they all were already in love with the Hip. Everybody who was there was already in love with the Hip. So we're coming into that, and also it was my 19th birthday, I believe. And this is a really weird memory to have, but there was some little like bar or something on site, and I wanted like my first drink, and it was going to be a strawberry daiquiri, but I think the mixer was broken. I could be wrong, but that's
funny. That would be impactful as a 19-year-old for sure.
That's what I recall. But the show was cool. I just remember Gordoni was just floating around the stage. He was literally swimming around the stage and doing his thing and covered in sweat, and beyond the lyrics, beyond the singing, he just always spoke to the crowd throughout the concert, throughout the show, just telling his stories. He was a poet, he was a storyteller, he was an artist, and so obviously that really hooked me. And the Skydiggers were good too, from what I remember. But that definitely was my first connection to them. And for me, I think the earlier songs, their earlier stuff, are probably closest to my heart, maybe for that reason. But yeah, and most recently you shared an album with me that he did. You can talk about it. I think you're even going to do a show on it, with some other artists that, Gord was obviously a standout and everybody thinks of him, but truly the band themselves, really, it was an all hands on deck effort. they all made the band together, I would say. I don't think they could have been the Tragically Hip without those key people. And, nothing against any single one of them, but they were just magic together and they belonged together, and it was a cool experience. So yeah.
Probably why they didn't try to, well, you could never replace him, but
Yeah. Yeah. No, they worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
So you're number 14, you're 13, you're 12, and 11.
So I also did Man Machine Poem as 14. And I don't have anything against the album. It just I haven't gotten into it. You know, it's a very personal thing. I think you're experiencing someone who's fighting through something horrible. So it's just deep, and it's one of those things I think that you take in little by little by little, and then someday you'll be like, wow, that was really cool. But I haven't gotten there yet. So that's my 14. Now for Plan A was 13. And I did like it. I re-listened to a few of the songs, and there's kind of a dreamy, cool feel to it. I just don't know it as well as I know some of the others. World Container was 12, and In Between Evolution was 11. And kind of similar to Deb, for me, kids came along in like 2006, and music became like less of the focus at that time. I would listen to it, and we do road trips and things like that, and I would hear it playing on the CD, but my brain was elsewhere. So that's kind of, I think that's why at least 3 of those were later on down my list.
Well, when it comes to this, if you got 14 albums, one of them has to be at 14.
They
That's
do.
the way
Yeah.
it is, right? I didn't find this as hard as I thought I was going to find it to be.
Really? I thought you would really have a conundrum about all this for sure.
No, there are 2 falling off points for me. So anyway, my introduction to the hip comes from obviously Canadian radio and Q107 with Rick Derringer. Derringer made a very big point to make sure that you were aware of who they were, because everyone on the planet of Canada was talking about how good these guys were going to be. Bruce Dickinson from MCA Records. No, not the guy from Iron Maiden. This is a MCA recording guy who's been around the block, came to see them early on, and he had that same feeling as well. There are multiple Canadians in history who have written about this meeting him for the first time, Gord and the band. One of them is Lee Harvey Osmond, which is actually Tom Wilson of Junk House. He wrote an entire book, and there's several paragraphs when he first met these kids, and was blown away. And he says, well, you're playing tonight, an open mic or whatever. It was open mic maybe or whatever. And he says, yeah, we're gonna do some Bob Dylan stuff, some Stones, some Kinks, some, he's like, really? You're looking at him and how young they were. He goes, what's the name of your band? And he goes, the Tragically Hip. He goes,
I love it.
Fucking great name. He goes, God bless it. so anyway, so I hear him on the radio, and this was up to here was, New Orleans was thinking was already somewhat of a thing going on in Canada, but it wasn't of the nature that it became, because the live version of it had not really been heard. But Road Apples was coming, and Little Bones was already on the radio, and the album was releasing, and that's kind of where Sue and I went to that show at Ontario Place, and they made this statement that we will probably never play a small venue again unless it's something obtuse where you won't be able to get in because it's 55 people and you'll have to pay $1,000. But I went, there were no tickets available. I got them scalped at a price that most people probably pay to see a show today. But it was front row, and to the left of me was Rick Derringer. Oh, that's hilariously
awesome.
enough,
that's a great story.
He looks over and he goes, "You're not Canadian." And I'm like, "What? I'm not wearing an ascot? What the shit? How do you know this stuff? This is
You're
crazy."
Not dressed as a Mountie,
right?
I mean,
And,
how does
but
he know?
he did. Yeah, he made this statement that was cool. He said, this band that's going to open is pretty damn good too. And that was the Sky Digger. So a little shout out to them. So my number 14 is We Are the Same. Why? We Are the Same for me has a country time tilt to it. While I'm not into that as much, this album didn't speak to me. There was no single that drove me to this record. So it's a little tougher for me. Number 13 is Now for Plan A. I mean, I like At Transformation a bit, but the rest of the album is a melancholy, lullaby-ish mood that works well with lush instrumentals and backing vocals, which were female at the time, against Gord Downey's vocals. Now, some people might not know about this record. His wife was diagnosed with cancer, and that's what was going on at the time. So this is, like you said, there was no plan B, no plan C. There's only plan A. So
I was going to say that's a great name of an album, and why? I love that.
Yeah. That, of course, it's my assumption. I'm reading into, but that's how I take it. And I do like the record. There's a lot of interesting things on it, but the Gord Downey vocal that you're hearing is more of a solo project Gord Downey and a side project Gord Downey to me.
Okay.
Number 12 is my least favorite Hip album that has the Hip being the Hip, and that's In Violet Light from 2002. If this was the fun, up-tempo, happier Hip, okay. I'm good. But I'm, Silver Jet Flies Overhead. This is the one I play the least of anything, even though I've ranked 14 and 13 here. Number 11 is Man Machine Poem. This is hard. I'm smitten with the writing, despite what Gordy is going through. It's difficult, but it's crafted so well and wound around some ridiculously great lyrics from In a World Possessed by the Human Mind and The Man and Machine, which the poem is put together, different songs, connections. The album is lost on my ability to go to it sometimes because it's just sad. It's been some things there. It's unfinished, it seems to me. So there's my 14, 13, 12, and 11. Deb, back to you for your, what is that? It's going to be 10, 9, 8, 7.
I would say that this was kind of the hard part for me because these four I could have switched around some and maybe even switched around with the next four. So these 8 were a little difficult, but my number 10 was Road Apples. I think just because it didn't come out at a time that really meshed up with anything that was going on with my life that I could go, oh, that's sentimental. Other than, in 2013 doing the Meals to Music. So it will always be special that way. The next one was We Are the Same. I actually ranked that higher than Road Apples because I did like the country part of it, which is,
It's
I know, but it was funny that
we'll get to that step off point on my end, but go ahead.
Okay. But that's funny that's probably the only reason I put that ahead of Road Apples was because of the country. And I don't like a lot of country, but I do like hints of it. Phantom Power, I put that at 8. There was nothing that jumped out at me that I'm sure that if I go to see the Strictly Hip now, there's a song thrown in and I go, I love that, but I don't know too much about that album. And then the next one was In Violet Light. That was lower on yours, both of yours, right? Did you put that lower, Sue, or you haven't named that one yet? That was Mark.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah, I just that for me, that yes.
Okay.
There's a playful happiness kind of thing going on, and I like my music dark. And even though
Yeah, you do.
I think that has the Dark Canuck on it, but when I saw that title, I went, "Oh, good, they're going to do something dark."
The Dark Canuck.
Yeah.
I love that. So those were my next words.
Okay. Sue.
So yeah, we're all kind of circling in the same pool a little bit. My number 10 was We Are the Same. I can't say that I really connected with a lot of the songs. I'm sure I've heard them and have enjoyed them. But number 10, in re-listening to them though, there was a vibe about it that I'm like, okay, Music at Work, again,
That's number 9.
number 9, Phantom Power, number 8, although Poets and Bob Cajun was on there, and I love those songs. It's
I
hard
do
because
too.
there's a couple that are like boom. And then and I remembered actually, Mark, that I didn't think you loved this one. And Violet Light was my number 7, but there's actually a lot of really good, well-written songs on there. And a couple years ago, we were with the girls in cemetery for, what was it, Memorial Day? Placing roses on, and we came across one of the Stones said, "It's a good life if you don't
If you don't
weaken."
weaken.
And I remembered him, like,
Ah,
where do I know that from? And then I'm like,
oh,
oh
I love
yeah,
it.
Tragically Hip.
I love it.
And it's a beautiful song. And the darkest one on that album too has like really beautifully sculpted lyrics. So it's really hard to like narrow all these down because there's good songs found on each album, I think. But
Yes.
like you said,
It is hard.
you're making us do this.
I'm making you do this. That's
And
right.
and I think what has made this even more difficult for me is just the last couple years going to see the Strictly Hip and listening to their their hits, but also they play a lot of the songs that weren't hits, but
Mhm.
we knew them because we're from Buffalo. And like the Bob Cajun thing. People think that might be, Jimmy Dean sausage. We know Bob Cajun's a place
Yeah.
because we're close to Canada, right? Somebody else in the country would be Bob Cajun. What is that? Well, it's a place. And that really lends to them being the quintessential Canada band, right? They're talking about where they're from. And it's hard for other people maybe to relate to if they don't have that background.
Yeah, I've always found that despite their Canadianism, we'll call it, I still fell in love with everything that is.
Mhm.
Despite that the song might have been Canadian in its nature, it still had an inclination to be worldwide.
Yes, international merit.
But did that prevent them from being the Rolling Stones or Rush?
Maybe.
Probably. More than likely it did. Songs like there's I can't even say the name of the town. Aspatawak or something.
Yeah, I saw
I don't even
it.
know
Oh,
how
yes.
you rhyme a song
Mhm.
to that, but he makes a song called Goodnight Aspatawak, or I don't know. Maybe that's not Goodnight. I don't even remember the title. But I know that was like, wow, we're trying to go to Bob Cajun, but we're going there in a totally obtuse way.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
that when they talk about things, when they drop a caribou, that's a coin. No one's gonna know what dropping a caribou is unless you're Canadian.
No, you think there's somebody shooting the caribou when you drop a
Yeah,
caribou,
right,
not just drop it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But I don't think they cared. I think they liked their relationship with Canada. I think that's
yeah,
what mattered most to them. So
I want to say there was
True.
somebody very well known that said that who was with them in times and stuff, and just said, when I saw those guys, they never looked like guys who cared whether they were famous or not.
mhm.
So that in itself, they didn't push
Makes you
market.
like them more.
Correct, right. They just wanted to be on stage. They just wanted to
Yeah.
sing songs. So, okay. So I got to go 10, 9, 8, 7. This is tough for me with all these screens and stuff. It's a big show. It's a really big show. So number 10 for me is In Between Evolution, which moved up a little bit in the rankings of my thought process. Vaccination Scar had me thinking we were getting back to a harder, darker Hip, but I had to come to grips with, there being more of a bar band than alternative rock. Songs like Summer's Killing Us, Are We Family, One Night in Copenhagen are good and cool, but just so far from what I wanted. I liked Mean Streak and It Can't Be Nashville Every Night. Those were the takeaways for me on that record. Although all the stuff is good enough for most listening. But yeah, so my number 9 is Phantom Power. All right, another hockey song. Yes, Fireworks. Well, that's just awesome. And I sort of didn't care what the Poets were doing, but off the bat, but eventually I started to care what the Poets were doing. And you'll see a theme in some of my listening habits as time goes on. I just thought there were too many monotone songs. Thompson Girl, Something On, and Membership. I mean, Membership just seems so, even though it's dark melody, it didn't do anything. But then Vapor Trails redeems it, Chagrin Falls, which is clever and fun, and then Escape is at Hand for the Traveling Man. So that's my number 9. My number 8, World Container, which is from 2006, which is the latest record to be the place the highest. Lonely End of the Rink. Oh, hell yeah. Another hockey song. This one's got flash and fury. I mean, he's even talking about a deke. I was all in. And any other songs like The Kids Don't Get It, and it goes into the Pretend, which it leads into, which is kind of cool. There's the In View and Don't Go Swimming Past the Drop Off. That is definitely a Dave Matthews Band, Don't Drink the Water. And they really well written and delivered World Container, which is the title track. I like that record a lot. I go back to it quite a bit. And of course, being a hockey guy, Lonely End of the Rink, it has to be played. Of course, it played multiple times on CBC Canada, Hockey Night in Canada. I'm sure they probably could have retired just on the rights playing that alone. My number 7 is Music at Work. Oh, my Music at Work. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse at the time. I had a few songs I liked, but it started with that opener. I really didn't like this guitar and drum work at the beginning, but then I finally figured it out. But there's something here. Lyricism on this album was hidden in deeper tracks like Lake Fever, The Completist. Shark has that swagger, and even the Bastards. That has bongos. Tragically Hip don't play bongos, but there's bongos in it. And I still go to this record. And if there was one track that I feel that most underrated Tragically Hip song in the catalog that I've heard it live, it's Tiger the Lion. Totally a little bit different. And it's something I think is one of the most underappreciated of their tracks. So there's mine. Back to you, Deb, for 6, 5, 4, 3.
Okay. 6 was World Container for me. That was tough. I thought about putting it higher up on my list, but it's definitely in the second half, or the top half, I should say. And it has a lot to do with the hockey and the songs that you would hear on mainstream, maybe not to the rest of the country, but in Buffalo, Hockey Night in Canada is mainstream. And that was, those songs being played when you're watching hockey with your kids that love hockey, then they recognize the songs, and it just becomes more of a connection through other people than just what I like. So my son was getting into music, and he was very eclectic in his tastes. And when he would hear something like that, and he would, oh, Mom, we got to play this on the radio, then I start to like it a little bit more than if it was just me. Number 5, though, I did the Now for Plan A, probably for the exact reasons you didn't have that higher in your ranking. I did like that dreamy, cool. It was different for me. It's even more meaningful with your take on it, Mark, as far as his wife being diagnosed with cancer, and how did that play into his songwriting and stuff? Because obviously when you have some, obstacles in life that you weren't expecting to come upon you, it can inspire you, or it can put you in bed for 3 years and you don't do anything, right? Well, he obviously channeled whatever was going on into that. Maybe he wanted to dream something better and wake up to have a perfect, who knows what it was, but I liked it. I didn't know that was what was going on in his life. Number 4, Trouble at the Henhouse. That was hard. I really love that album, and I thought about putting that up higher. I think that might be the first album that I really listened to start to finish out of the Hip. And then 3 up to here. I think that has a lot to do with this. After I went back and was looking at the catalog, I recognized more songs than I thought that I knew. you know, as we've talked on other shows, I might be able to tell you what group that's singing that song. I might be able to
But not
tell
what
you what
album it's
decade
from.
it's from, but not what album or the name of the song. So that's where I kind of fall short compared to everybody else on the panel. So those are my 6, 5, 4, 3.
Sue.
So my number 6 was their EP. And the two standout songs for me on that were Highway Girl and I'm a Werewolf Baby. 5 was Day for Night. Again, I mean, So Hard Done By and Grace 2 were perfection. And they stood out from the crowd, I think, on the rest. I mean, again, like you said, the whole album's good, but those are like, for me, the showcases. Number 4 was Trouble at the Henhouse. You had Ahead by a Century, the Apartment Song, and I don't think we have gone into a gift shop since without you singing the gift shop song. So that's, number 4. And
That's
then
funny.
it's true.
I know.
And then number 3 is Fully Completely. I think it's a great album. I worried for them because I worried for the Tragically Hip. But I worried because, I loved Melissa Etheridge early stuff. And then all of a sudden she got to Come to My Window. And I felt like she went totally against who I loved and who I was drawn to. But everybody, that was for me, that was like when everyone was like, oh, who's this band? We got to go see this band. And they really got on board with Courage, Wheat Kings, the 100th Meridian.
Yeah.
I want to say, I think that's the one, Mark, that, what is it, the trunk, Locked in the Trunk of a Car?
Locked in the Trunk of a Car.
Yes.
That was like one of Lauren's favorites, I think, driving to preschool, right? That's your story.
Yes. Try to explain that to the preschool teacher.
Authorities.
When everybody else is doing Barney, and she says her favorite song is Locked in the Trunk of a Car.
Yeah, that sounds like that's an R. Kelly song. Oh.
Yeah, in a Catholic school too. That's nice. That's great.
But
no.
It was a solid album, and thankfully it wasn't their departure from originality and personality. So, and again, like you're saying, maybe to their detriment, like maybe that could have been their diving board if they had wanted like worldwide fame, but not everybody does. So a lot of people are like, okay, we know what we're capable of, but this is what we want to do. And this is a song that our people like, and we're going to stick to it, and continue to experiment. And that's kind of what I feel like they did. But so that's my 6, 5, 4, 3.
Well, that's interesting because I put that at my 11th, probably for the same reasons that you put yours further up your list. And that's why this show is so interesting, because now I can go back and go, oh, now I get that perspective.
Yeah.
When you do this again, if we were to ever do it again and have these music at be on your radio, where we do it a decade later, your album might list change, right? Your top,
definitely,
right? This is tough. So, So my number 6 is the EP, the Tragically Hip 1989. I love the raw passion of it. It's the Kinks meets the Stooges meets some of the Stones. Of course, Werewolf Baby and Highway Girl, like my wife mentioned, will forever remain ingrained as one of the most unique live performances in music history. I won't go into it, but the Double Suicide is definitely worth checking out on Music at the Roxy, Live at the Roxy, which is a companion piece to the Road Apples Deluxe Edition, or you can buy it separate. Look, I'm advertising now.
I know what's happening.
Yeah.
I just got this scrolling up about how much, www.
So my number 5
royalty
is Trouble at the Henhouse from 1996.
Okay, we're all around in the same area.
I was not happy with this album.
Why?
My wife and I went to see the Hip in Rochester. I didn't like the show. There was no soliloquy. Gord Downie was standing there playing the guitar and singing along to the guitar. I was pissed. This was not the band I remembered. This was not the shows I remembered. But I didn't like, right? The more the songs and the lyrics made slowly started to creep, right?
Mhm.
Despite that, this being the album that stopped me from seeing them live for quite some time because they lost the soliloquies, I'm back into it, right? I still love flamenco, the slithering lyrics of it. You know, maybe a prostitute could teach you how to take a compliment. Those are ridiculously interesting lyrics. And Downey, you know, the gift shop, you can't get out of there without going to the gift shop. And I can't even believe my wife mentioned
That's
Apartment
funny.
Song, which is hilarious because I mean, I find it to be one of the little funny, quirky songs. I mean, what your apartment does when you're not around, I guess it doesn't concern us. The you know, the coffee and the spoons are having conversations. Yeah, great. And Let's Stay Engaged is very bluesy, and the psychedelic ism of
Mhm.
Sherpa.
Yeah.
And at number 5, The Trouble in the Henhouse, now ahead by a century, was probably the number one song of all time for
Definitely.
them
Yeah.
nationally,
Uh-huh.
internationally, which is interesting because it's more of a country-ish kind of feel. My number 4 is
Really?
Up to Here. So this is probably where the attention began. Iconic songs, Blow It High Dough, New Orleans is Sinking, and there's so many deeper tracks here. Despite the dated raw production, maybe a little bit of it, and some of it trickle down. 38 years old, which I do not believe we've ever heard live, Sue.
Nope.
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 I'm only sad that I've never heard that live. Interesting fact with this record is July 1989 in Madison, Wisconsin, the Tragically Hip played. And someone opened for them, whose album in 1991 would be world renowned. Nirvana opened for the
I
Tragically
knew
Hip in
you were going to
Madison,
say that. I
Wisconsin.
didn't know it, but I knew you were going to say Nirvana. For
Okay.
real.
Goes to
That's
show you
amazing.
the upper northern U.S. infection of Canada's gentlemen, the Tragically Hip, because
Wow.
Nirvana was opening for them. And
That's impressive.
my number 3, why am I off kilter here? Sorry. Fully Completely, 1992. Such an anticipated follow-up record because Road Apples was such a success. Another flawless record, in my opinion, with not a single solitary repetitive position, completely unique from the previous and even deeper in track and production. What is better, maybe at the time because it was newer, but these are iconic songs in their catalog. And again, when they're played live, and most of the album could be played from start to finish. Magically translated into live shows in such a way that Gord Downie felt like a man possessed by a writing, story weaving, reincarnated Morrison. The band musicianship and tempo was just on spot, whether it's throes of political, dispassionate ballads like Wheat King or in the frenzy of Wherewithal. So at that point, we'll get to our final 2. I just want to reiterate a few things of the catalog before we finish up. The Tragically Hip's EP is 2 times platinum, which means 200,000 copies of an EP were sold. Up to Here is diamond status. That's 1 million copies. Road Apples is diamond. Fully Completely is diamond. Day for Night is 6 times platinum. So is Trouble at the Henhouse. Phantom Power is 3 times platinum. Music at Work is 2 times platinum. And Violet Light is platinum. And World Container and We Are the Same are platinum. While Now for Plan A are gold. And Man Machine Poem are gold. People are still buying these records today. People are still discovering this band. And that will be our discussion at the end, whether this band is legendary, iconic, relevant, club level, opening act, or faded memory. When I talk about legendary, the entire catalog is near perfection, reliable, inventive, sincere, and influential. Iconic, very memorable, very influential to the listener in the industry. It's trend-setting and probably generational. Relevant, the albums have been getting better as they move forward. Maybe they're hitting a stride, or maybe into potential greatness. At the club level, they have some good albums, some songs, but not as reliable, nor are they as inventive. Opening act, there is something special about the album or the songs, and they have some more to prove, or potentially they are comfortable with where they are, perhaps. And then a faded memory, the band is merely a shadow of themselves, little relevance except in the past. It's a catalog you listen to less often, one of the albums maybe more so than any other. So you can see that on our website too when you're looking at the shows, etc. So I thought I'd throw that in before I got too far. Deb, you're number 2 and you're number 1, and then where you are with the band.
All right. My number 2 is Day for Night. I think all of you had, both of you had that album high up on your list, right? But number 1, I know this is just the complete opposite of what you think, but I liked In Between Evolution because that was from 2004, I believe. It's because it reintroduced fans to who they originally were. I get trademark sound, and that was at the time my kids then were 15 and 11, and they wanted to have music on all the time, in the house, in the car, and we were kind of, as parents, not so much dictating but shaping what they liked. I mean, that particular album, Christopher, my son, really started to not just listen to the music, but listen to the words. And so it made me do the same thing instead of just having it as background noise, ambient noise. So it's important to me because of what it meant to him. And I think that it helped him later in life be appreciative of somebody like Johnny Cash or Ray Charles, because, they were now playing what made them who they were. And maybe that was redundant to other people, but to us, it opened up the Tragically Hip to the kids. So that's why I chose that one as my number 1, even though probably not everybody else's.
Okay. So in my doing this, did I get out of sort? Did I even finish listing?
You did.
I did. Okay.
Your list, yeah.
Okay, because I'm sitting here looking at my, scrolling, and I'm like, where did I end up? Where are we?
No, because you wound up
So I talked in Trouble at the Henhouse, and then I did up to here.
Up to here.
Right? Did I go to Day for Night? That number 3?
Wait.
I think you did. That you mentioned Day for Night. I don't know which number I can't keep track of your numbers and mine.
So
yeah, you got me
I'll edit this part here and get it back in line. So
I just know my numbers.
Yes.
I just know my numbers, Mark. I
I'm
can't be
my
babysitting
numbers.
you too.
Sue.
All right.
Sue, I'll get it to you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so my number 2 was Road Apples. And my favorite, they're all my favorites, but Twist My Arm, Three Pistols, Fiddler's Green, On the Verge, Bring It All Back, Cordelia. It's the hip. And then my number 1, well, you should be able to guess if you've been following around my list, but it's Up to Here. Up to Here. New Orleans is Sinking, which I mean, I love this song. Honestly, I love it. Everyone's like, "Oh, New Orleans is Sinking is my favorite song." It's not my favorite song, but it is the hit. Boots and Hearts, Blow It High Dough, Trickle Down. Like Mark was saying, I always wanted to hear 38 Years Old in concert and never got the chance. I found it was just such a deep, dark, and good story, good song, and I was sad that we never got to hear it live. But so that is my number 1. And then just like my last take on it, again, like going back, it's interesting Deb said that about what was the album again, The Evolution, because I did find the same thing. It was kind of like a reboot, not a reboot, but touches of shades of where they started from, but more mature, evolved. And
In Between Evolution.
yeah. And for me though, then then I was moving into a different time. And so my listening year, not just for the hip, but for music and movies just, it shifts. So you kind of get out and you're not like, it becomes less of a, music is less of a selfish thing and you're focused on other areas. So probably at some point in time listening to these again, like you said, I think we had a teacher once at law court who talked about Shakespeare and the plays and how, you can read them throughout your life, and every time you go back and read them, they have different meaning for you because you've been through different things in your life. Um, Gord and the songwriting, and he was very deep. And I love a storyteller and I love lyrical songs. Um, so I think they're all something that we can grow into. And again, I guess we haven't gotten down to that point yet, but I have shared it with people that aren't from this area and they didn't quite get it and didn't seem to have any interest at all, which is, it seems very weird, but I guess if you're not brought up with it and haven't listened to it and kind of watched them grow, maybe you missed that boat, which is sad for them. But so yeah, that's kind of how I feel on that.
Okay.
And just
We'll go
going back
back.
to my last one though, the machine poem, I kind of felt bad like rating it last because he probably worked, if you think about it, he probably worked the hardest on that one just to get through. Um,
Yeah,
but
I agree. I kind of feel like that's a disservice to him,
yeah,
but not in the vein of what we're doing here.
right. So
Yeah.
someday, and also, they had that what was it, like a bio? If you haven't seen the bio video on them, it's incredible. Um, for many reasons, but that's another one. It's hard to watch because we're also connected to this band and what they've been through
Yeah,
the years and how they
it's
filter through our
personal.
lives.
It
Yeah,
feels personal, right?
Yep.
but it's definitely worth a watch. And that,
Yep.
didn't make the list, but it's something else for people to look out for. And you probably know the name of it, Mark. I don't know.
Yeah, how do
Actually
we watch that?
not off the top of my head, but yeah, it's
Add that at the end.
Yeah,
Look that up.
I can put that in the comments and stuff at the end. I'll
Yep.
put a link. So yeah. So I'm gonna say that I didn't mention my number 3 because it doesn't look like I typed it or said it, but is Day for Night, which was 1994. This album I had to go to Canada to get. I had to have it when it dropped because of how good the next couple had been. So it's the darker production. It's a darker Tragically Hip. The
Do you
songs are
remember?
dark.
Do you remember what record store you went to?
I'm pretty sure it was over the border in Canada, just past Lundy's Lane.
That little mall.
Yeah, in that mall. I don't remember the name of the record store, but yeah,
Yeah,
that mall is probably no longer there. But there was
yeah.
actually a popular place we used to eat in there too, the Mandarin,
hmm
which is still there.
Yeah.
So my number 2 and 1. So my number 2 is Fully Completely. This is 1992. It was such an anticipated follow-up record, another flawless record from my standpoint. It's completely unique in everything it does. The songs they'll play over and over and over again. Oh, I did this. See, this was my number 2. I played number 3. That's where my error was. Now I see it. So there. Yep.
Found the error of your
Wow.
ways.
I found the error of my ways, right?
All right.
Yeah. All right. So my number 1 is Road Apples. So
I
in
knew it.
1990, this is where we started to pay attention, and this album came out. I know that they had been able to record at Daniel Lanois' studio in New Orleans, although Daniel Lanois did not produce the record. I remember going to Record Theater and picking this up because they carried, Canadian releases by importing them. They were more expensive, but who cared? We have a strong connection here in Buffalo to the Tragically Hip, not only the local record stores, but the venues and promoters. There's plenty you can look up there if you want to, and if I can find the links, I will. They were very responsible for, making this band successful, some of those people. Well, there's a lot that's Canadian. That voice, lyricism, and delivery spoke to me as a singer, a writer, and a music lover. There were 2 albums deep in me, and they were Truly one of the most unique bands on the planet, despite the US's obsession with Nevermind, 10, Octung Baby, as well as some album that wasn't even titled by a band named Metallica. I guess it was their Black album. I don't know. I guess it did really well. Even their outtakes and variations attest to this in their anniversary edition, as well as the tracks that didn't make the original recording, which got their own EP. Think back to that album, like I mentioned it, unreleased tracks and variations. How many bands can pull that off? Every time I hear a track that wasn't released, it's garbage. Doesn't work, doesn't fit. These guys have a catalog in Road Apples of 6 tracks that didn't make the album that were, supposedly lost in a fire. Luckily, they got some of them back. The only one that, ouch, seems to be right in the wheelhouse of it, like it was almost identical to another song, but the rest of it is still unique, and I still don't understand why those songs were cut. But in hindsight, what a beautiful thing to have Road Apples release many years later and have that as an addition. Live at the Roxy, which is off this list, is probably, to me, one of the greatest live albums ever made. It was something that was so coveted and so necessary, and so I had bootlegs of it. I've got bootlegs of the Hip, all kinds of them, tons of them. None of them live up to that moment. Whoever was there was a lucky son of a bitch. I'll tell you, that's for sure. So, ladies, now it's that time.
Oh,
How are you rating this? Legendary, iconic, relevant, club level, opening act, faded memory. Deb, you're on the spot. Try not to piss off 33 million Canadians.
okay. I'm going to say iconic. Because nothing is perfection. However, it's only because I don't know the catalog well enough. So stay tuned for the 10th anniversary of this show. And it might go
Where
up
are
to
you now?
legendary. That's what I would say to you. But iconic, based on what your criteria was, and based on my knowledge, which is limited compared to you two, I still think that iconic is a pretty damn good rating. And that's what I give them.
Yeah. Sue.
I had some difficulty with this. Again, because there were, if you can mesh it together, the criteria of each one, I think it would be like legend, iconic. For me personally,
like a Brangelina thing.
Legend iconerary. What?
Personally, it has to be legendary because it holds a lot of good memories for me personally.
Right.
But then again, too, like I said, in sharing it with some other people out there who haven't heard it and don't connect, then I realize, okay, it really is kind of a Buffalo thing. It's a border thing. It's a Canadian thing. But so I, basically on my personal experience with the band, I say legendary. Starting with the show in Ontario Place to all the road trips we've taken, listening to it. They're the types of songs and the sounds. It's unmistakably the Hip every time. And again, Mark, when you shared that last album with me that he did, we're recording with other musicians.
Bob Rock, yes.
It just was not the same. It was his voice, but thank God that he met his band because that's what worked. That's what made it magic, I think. And listening to it, it takes you back to a place. And at the same time, it's timely. You can be in the present with it. Lyrically, musically, I loved it. Gord's voice is incredible. The instruments were perfect for what it was, and I'm just glad that we got to. It's kind of cool to be a part of a band from the very beginning and be there for the whole thing and watch how they evolve and where they take things. And I think how he went out, how he held on to it for himself, for his family, for his fans, for his country was incredible. So legendary, I guess.
Okay. Well, for me, I am like my wife, stuck in this verbiage that doesn't match. I believe their albums are iconic. I believe their live performances are legendary. I have seen a lot of bands that do a lot of great things, that have brilliant shows, brilliant stage show, laser lights, all kinds of crushing craziness going on. But I have never been as enthralled as I always have been when they play. And that started early. And then, as I talked about my disillusionment in Trouble at the Henhouse in Rochester, it was many years later I went back to a show at the Outer Harbor where they played, and I believe World Container was the album they were touring on at that point, and all over again, right? And just that front man and his band, just playing it, making it happen. Still memorable for me to this day. They are the reason that I'm doing this show today and not postponing it or putting it off, or, this is a beautiful way to start the catalog review show with one of my favorite bands of all time, not only in albums, and they've got enough of them at 14, 15, 16. They have a live performance and a memory that transcends all that, which many of you out there will as well have with other bands and this band as well. So I want to thank my panelists for tonight and doing this. We're on the web at www.beyondyourradio.com, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Watch the website for the articles, Album Review Saturdays, which sometimes can be videos, and then Unknown Sundays, which was today, was Michael Kiwanuka. Thank you, everyone, and happy listening.
Bye.